When looking for a brand new heavy tank to be playing within World of Tanks, you may not have realised just how good the T110E5 is, and today's video will showcase just why this old tank within World of Tanks console Modern Armour is so good. So we're going to have a look at why that is, what sort of setup you should be using on the tank, and go into two different gameplays where we showcase some of the key attributes of the tank. And hopefully you will enjoy this video, and if you do, then make sure to hit the like button, and of course then we'll get into the video now. So first things first, it is of course equipment time. We will be looking at the key things that you'll need to be putting on, and that is essentially whenever you can on a heavy tank, you want to make sure you put on the gun stabilizer. That just improves the accuracy by 20%, which is massive. And when you are playing a heavy tank, you want to be making sure that your shells count, because often you don't have the best DPM, which is damage per minute. Hence, you can get more shots off, at least more consistently, and have better effective damage per minute. And so what we're doing here is making our tank more accurate. Then of course you want to make sure that you're pumping out those shots as quickly as possible, and so just having a flat boost to the amount of rate of fire that you can have within your tank, and the loading time decreased by 10%, increasing the amount that you can dish out every single minute. Hence advanced loader is super useful within World of Tanks console. Then of course what you want to go with is either, you've got some options here, and this is kind of similar to what you usually have within tanks, and picking the equipment slots. You can of course drop the improved ventilations, which we've gone with in this one. That's just basically to improve things like your track repair speed by 5%, your vision range by 5%, it improves your reload by 5%. There's loads of different little things that it improves by 5%. And so I guess if you want a holistic nature, then improved ventilation is useful. However, it is of course potential for you to drop improved ventilation and go with something like view range, or potentially maybe you want to go a little bit faster in the E5 to bring that top speed of 37 kilometers an hour up to maybe 42 or somewhere along that line, where you become more of a fast heavy tank, something that can move forward and be a kind of wall breaker of a heavy tank. And that is where the E5 kind of plays in. It's a very much a brawling DPM style heavy tank where you want to be making sure that you can just harass opponents, and that is exactly why I like the E5 so much, and why we've managed to 3-mark the tank at tier 10. Not only that, of course, when looking at the tank, you want to make sure that you've got an enhanced repair kit, so you can repair all of your modules, including those useful tracks. And so if you get tracked out in the open, you want to make sure you can get back out of the open, because yeah, the armor on the tank can be a little bit good when you look at the turret armor, but the hull armor is fairly reliably penned by a lot of tanks, and so that's kind of the weak point of the tank itself. So make sure you've got enhanced repair kit. I could potentially drop it off for repair kit because they don't do much of a difference, but it is useful to, of course, if you have the credits, to spend it on that. And then of course med kit, standard one. You don't need a premium med kit, to be honest, for 95%, unless you're really trying to go for, you know, the 3rd mark of excellence, 4th mark of excellence. It just gives you a tiny minuscule amount of advantage, and for costing you 20,000 credits every game, it's just not worth it. Then of course we have enhanced rations, which is probably the most important one, and that just gives you a flat 10% better crew performance. So it's essentially like having 2 improved ventilations, and it also gives you more commander XP. And then during the active time, when you press B or whatever you've set it to within your consumables lists, that will basically boost your crew performance by an additional 15%. So it just makes you so much better when you've activated that. Now, as with all tanks, make sure that you do put camouflage on if you're really trying to min-max the tank, because it does improve your actual camo value of the tank, bringing down that still concealment lower than the original base value. It's just a little tip, you know, you don't have to do it. It's quite expensive if you don't have kind of discounts on the camouflage and stuff like that. So, you know, it's really down to you whether you want to spend the extra credits to basically be a tiny tad bit better and more concealed. But with a heavy tank, you don't need to be that concealed, especially one that is such a kind of frontline brawler. Not only that, let's look at the statistics of the vehicle. Obviously, very, very good accuracy. 0.29 on a heavy tank. This is a heavy tank, meaning that yes, you can snapshot, you can fire on the move very consistently. And I don't mean firing on the move while auto-aimed. You can actually aim during movement to be able to pinpoint rounds into lower plates and stuff like that on the move. And that is why I think I love the E5 so much, is because you can actually accurately fire on the move. That's a bit of a mouthful there, but yeah, very, very decent tank, and I love playing this one, and I really do hope some of you actually go towards it. You don't see that many in the matchmaker, but that doesn't mean it isn't a good tank. I just think a lot of people think that I'm going to get the high alpha damage heavy tanks that are going to be way better, but their DPM is often really bad, and the T110E5 is certainly not awful. 8.78 rounds a minute, bringing your DPM probably in the region of about 2,500, which by no means is awful. Yes, it's probably not the best in the game. Actually, I've miscalculated that massively. It's probably in the region of nearly 3,500 even. So there we go, 400 alpha damage per shot, which is very nice. 258mm of frontal penetration even. Just standard penetration. And then 340mm of heat penetration, which, trust me, comes in very, very nicely against those E100s that you'll be facing, and you can pump them twice for every single time they hit you once. And often you can actually bounce the E100 rounds unless they're firing heat rounds at your hull armour. Now, given the fact that we've gone through the statistics, let's jump into some gameplay and show you how this tank is so good and why you might want to go towards it. Right then, first game, Sunset Coast, one of the newer maps within World of Tanks. I say newer, it's a reskinned version of Airfield, and if you don't know what Airfield is, it's basically remove all of the trees off of this map, make it a little bit more deserty, remove some of the water, and you've basically got Airfield. I probably prefer the Airfield variant. I think this map has way too much concealment and basically promotes even more camping, but there we go. I guess that's kind of the trade-off with some of these maps that Wargame are trying to introduce. I get the fact that sometimes you do need camo for some of the TDs and more stealthy tanks to be able to kind of move in the back and use their tanks at least effectively on some of the maps, but this isn't the way. Just don't think that this map is particularly that great. But anyway, moving into the E5, you see we can get into position fairly quickly, and we can actually try and use some of the view range that this tank gets, because it's not awful. For a heavy tank, you can actually dish out damage quite reliably, I should say, and you can also spot opponents, which means you can get consistent spotting damage, and combine them both together, you're going to have a pretty decent result, even if you don't necessarily have the highest damage game that you'll ever have within World of Tanks. Now, moving forward, what we're going to do in this game mode, well, Airfield, or basically this Airfield variant, Sunset Coast, what we're going to do is move over in this section. Now, when coming around this corner, you have to be very, very careful of straight ahead of me. No, not the rock straight ahead of me. The tanks that are going to be sat on the ridge line behind that rock, because they can shoot you as you come around that corner, and trust me, 90% of the time they will. Obviously, with the view range of this tank, it means that we can spot if they probably shoot us. Now, not necessarily something if it was like an ESA E25 or something with ridiculous camo, but obviously we can't meet any of them anyway. But you can see right here the snapshot ability of the AMX 1390, and the us on the AMX 1390 even, apologies, but yeah, it really is a fantastic snapshot, and you can see once again straight into the side of the Object 432, and we're going to have to turn around here and try and advance on some of the opponents potentially. Obviously, 1157 damage at the beginning of the game is not bad in a heavy tank, and we've just met the 110 here, and this is where having gun depression of 10 degrees is really, really useful against some of the tanks like the 110, who definitely don't get 10 degrees of gun depression, and yeah, we can just slap them straight in the front of the turret armor. It feels a little bit bad against this guy because there's probably nothing he can do. He can barely see the hull armor of the tank, and especially if we wiggle back and forward and hope that he bounces around, then yeah, there's pretty much nothing he can do. You see he shot there, which means we can then try and finish him off with the final shot, and we'll probably reload even before he manages to either. So there we go, slapping the final round into him and taking him out of the game. 2,700 damage already within this game, pretty much tearing apart a 110 from full health to absolutely nothing, which is always good. Now we're in a bit of a sticky situation, and this is always the case when pushing forward from this direction on Sunset Coast, is when you go up into this position, you either have people from behind you trying to shoot you, that we do know that there is one person, but often there's some campers up by that 705A over there, straight ahead, where they get very difficult to actually spot them, especially when there's so many bushes in front. And as we talked about earlier in the game, there is obviously usually a lot of people over to the right hand side, which can get some shots onto you and can potentially take a couple of 100 hit points off of you if they do manage to get a shot. And just there you saw over to the right hand side on that ridge line that we talked about earlier, that is where those tanks are hidden, and without having anyone push up and spot them, we cannot do absolutely anything, and they can get side shots into us. So we're going to now reverse back, and the reverse speed of the tank is not awful, nothing majorly special, but it definitely isn't able to kind of compete with things like medium tanks, but for a heavy tank, very useful, especially when you do make a bit of a misplay or you go into an area that you probably shouldn't have. And so that's where I do enjoy using this. Object 263 over there, kind of can't get a nice shot onto him, and so we're in a bit of a pickle here. Do we need to advance? Do we need to do something as we snap around into the M40 8A2 over there, the 120mm, and we try and snap another one into him? Don't really have to be too conscious of firing in this tank because 5-second reload. It means that, yeah, you don't have to be as conscious as maybe playing in a 705A, where you have awful accuracy and also a pretty long reload, which means that, yes, you have to be more situational when you're going to fire, so you can't take those kind of lucky snapshots at people. That's kind of where I like the E5, and why we talked about, you know, firing on the move is so consistent, is because you can see the little tiny bloom that you get with this tank, making it so fun to play. Really is probably one of my favourite heavy tanks, and hence why I went for it first within World of Tanks. Well, second tier 10 heavy within World of Tanks, but the one of the first tier 10s that I did actually have in the game. So this is what I'm on about with the firing on the move and being able to consistently damage opponents. We did go for the tracks because if we can lock him down, that'll mean that we can get some nice side shots or whatever. Object 705 here. He's trying to turn for us, but we're too fast for him. We're going to put another round in. Object 263 over there thinks he's very funny by shooting us twice within this game, but I don't think so. We're going to try and snap a shot, but obviously managed to hit the upper plate of that tank, which is the strongest part, as we plow around into the lower plate, which definitely isn't. Obviously now he's trying to escape behind the rock, and we're going to have absolutely none of that in a second as we decide to move forward and try and press our advantage onto this Object 263, as rounds from both artillery and our team are going into him. It's not looking very good for the 263, and definitely shotgun will not be able to do too much as he bounces off of our upper plate there, which is not consistent with this tank, so don't go thinking that's going to be a consistent trick with this tank. So sharpshooter moving in, kind of getting in the way of us and not allowing us to get any damage, but we do manage to pick up that final shot into the side of the armor of the Object 263 and pick up the final kill of the game, bringing our damage total above 5,000 damage, which certainly isn't an awful game. Not one of the best games you can ever think of in a T125, but 5,121 damage, 540 assistance, and we blocked a reasonable amount as well. So really nice game for us there, and hopefully you did enjoy that watching that one. But that's not the only one we have for this video. Let's get into the next one. Now, Duke La Pass is the second gameplay of today, and this was directly after that game right there, and we managed to have a pretty substantial impact, at least not necessarily on the damage front, but we do manage to really push forward our team and really try and consolidate the victory, hopefully, within this game. Now, pushing forward on this map, where do you want to go? Well, you want to make sure that you're going somewhere where you're going to be in constant fighting so you can use the DPM. You don't want to be going one flank where there's going to be two opponents to fight, because often, you know, because this tank relies on having DPM, when you're engaging two tanks and having only two opportunities to shoot two different tanks, you can't use that effective DPM very well. So you want to make sure that you have lots of opponents to either shoot at or get consistent damage when you reload. And so if you've got 5 tanks in front of you, at least one of them is probably going to be offering you at least an opportunity to shoot. And when you can shoot every 5 seconds, as with the E5, then yeah, that becomes very easy. And so that's why I do enjoy this tank so much, is because you can flick onto people, you can use DPM, you can do all of that, and that's why I do really like it. Now, we've gone into this position, a pretty forward position in terms of, well, at least in the beginning of the game, so that we can get a little bit of damage early on. And if you can do that, then you can then basically save your hit points for the later half, and then use that against some of the opponents that maybe have taken a couple or 3 or 4 hits. And that's where the E5 really comes in clutch, because yes, if you've got over 1,000 damage at the end of the game, you can consistently take out a lot of the opponents on the enemy team, because you have the DPM advantage. And yes, you can take 700, but you can dish out multiple shots of damage into them for every time they hit you. So that's why I think you need to be super mindful of playing tanks like this. Is yes, you don't want to be trading 1 for 1, but that's why making sure that there are multiple tanks that you can fight is very, very key within the game. Saying that, we notice that pretty much none of their team have gone the left hand side, because you can see a lot of our medium tanks have progressed. And so what we're going to do now is try and help over on the other flank, because having that situational awareness, and I'm not talking about this crew skill, I'm talking about your actual situational awareness. Oh look, our team have not spotted barely anyone over on the left hand flank. What does that mean? Well, there's 15 tanks in the game, and if we've only spotted 4 on the left hand flank, that would suggest that there'd be 11 on the right hand side. And so you need to be thinking of this if you're trying to play in tanks like this, to make sure that you position yourself in the right area, because trust me, the E5 does not do well when there are multiple angles and multiple tanks shooting it from all angles, because it does really heavily rely on its frontal turret armour and getting hulled down and making sure that you hide the lower plate of the tank. That's also a key thing that you want to be doing, as the Waffle Panzer IV manages to bounce off of us somehow, which is nice, and we managed to actually hit him there, track him in place and get some assistance damage, which is always really, really funny when someone tries to fully aim at you and then you just swing around, as with the accuracy of this tank, and put a nice dumpy round straight into them and get rewarded for it. Now, with moving up into this position, I know that I'm going to basically be the frontal assault, the kind of linchpin of our attack, and if I kind of get taken out, then it allows the opponents to then push forward, get into more advanced positions, and it means that then they can really get themselves into an area which is going to mean that they can basically deal damage to my team consistently. So what we've got to do is make sure that that doesn't happen, as the Waffle Panzer IV comes around and gets slapped again. He's really not having a good day when trying to go for me in this game, but I don't care, I'm going to go for the Maus. We will deal with the Waffle Panzer IV in a little bit, but if I go for him, I'm going to expose myself to all of those tanks over on the right, the Quillin over there, which is not a nice tank to be getting hit by. A lot of alpha damage, and can consistently do that. You saw me actually snapping a shot into the AMX-50B, but that was really, yes, it was a bad shot, but that's because we had to kind of get in before he unloaded a couple shots into the side armour of the E5, which, believe me, is not particularly the best in the game. And so yeah, a little bit tedious if you're going to be trying to side scrape against some of the high caliber rounds in the game, because yeah, often they can actually hit the raised bit of your engine deck, which I know most of you won't get what I'm meaning by saying this, but because the engine deck is kind of curved at the back of the tank, from the front you can actually even see the back of the tank, if that makes sense. I know it sounds a bit convoluted, but you can basically hit the back of the tank when you're aiming, because the side, the only bit covering it is basically the turret, and if you aim to the sides and at the back of the tank, you can deal that damage to the E5. And all of pretty much the American heavy tanks, they're all very similar. Same with things like the E4. A lot of those American tanks have kind of a rounded engine deck, which means that they are raised, and so you can hit them from the front, which a lot of people always complain about. Things like the T30 as well, all of those sort of tanks, they all have the same sort of engine deck. Now, granted, we know about the weak spot of the engine deck. You can see around narrowly missing us, but the Quill in there snapping a nice heat round straight into the front of us, which is always fun. But we can pinpoint the E75 here. You see what I'm doing right now? Raising my gun barrel up so that they can't hit the cupola of the E5, which is the weakest point of the turret, and so yeah, you can get penned fairly reliably if they manage to hit that cupola, especially with the premium ammunition in the game. Not so much with standard, it does actually bounce quite a few rounds now, but if you can put your turret up into, your gun up into the air, you can avoid taking shells because of course your gun acts as armour and it will absorb any of the shells that are coming through. It can't penetrate through your gun, it's just a wargaming mechanic in the game, so that's something you'll need to know. What we're doing in this position, although not having best impact, I guess, in terms of the amount of damage that we're dishing out, we're really stopping all of the opponents from really making any plays. We're allowing time for the left-hand flank to then push forward because we're in a really annoying spot for the opponents. Although, you know, we may not necessarily be doing any damage, we're really stalling them for the rest of the team. And you'll see in just a second how quickly the enemy team disappears as our team from the left-hand side then meet and put them in that typical sausage sandwich, as I always talk about. Yeah, and they're basically getting sandwiched from both sides, and we're now going to hopefully get around into the mouse. We do, but it only hits that kind of vision port, which doesn't actually count as armour, which was a little bit disappointing. But nonetheless, 2,532 damage within this game, 1,500 blocked, which is very nice. We've also managed to get 1,800 assistance, and we bounce off the flat side of the E75 there. I have absolutely no idea how that did actually hit. Maybe I hit the back of the engine deck, which was really, really angled and sloped. Maybe that was the reason. But nonetheless, we'll put around into the back of the E100, try and track him, but we will pick up the final damaging hit. And then there is of course only the M53-55, and he is removed quite happily by the T28, who probably got focused by him quite harsh in that game. But there we go, a pretty decent result and a kind of showcasing what games should look like in the E5. Not necessarily the highest pinnacle games, but it really does showcase how aggressive you do need to be in the E5. Not all of the time, because sometimes you do need to sit back a little bit more and take in the scenery and wait for the battle to develop. But when you do see the situation arrive and you need to change flanks and progress your flank and just hold up the opponents, this can be a great tank to do so with that turret armor. And hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. And of course, if you aren't already, subscribe and check out some of the other videos on the channel. I have got a World of Tanks PC channel that I've started up, so if you're interested in that, just go onto the community tab. I will have a link over there where you can check out that channel, all about World of Tanks PC and some gameplays of some people that have just had unbelievable results, and we'll kind of showcase some content over there if you're interested in that. But that's just the final bit of the video. Hopefully you did enjoy, and I hope you'll join me back tomorrow for an update news for the week and the new season within World of Tanks. Hopefully you enjoy that, and I hope to join you there. Goodbye.